Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Today, we have a great panel for you. It's around Okta Ventures, accelerating innovation in the identity ecosystem. My name is Monty Gray. And before we start, let me just show you the quick safe harbor. We have to do this. We're a public company. So flagging that, so any forward-looking statements we share here are clearly subject to change. Feel free to read the safe harbor at your convenience. Okay, let's get into the panel. We have an exciting conversation going today. So I am the Senior Vice President of Corporate Development here at Okta. In this capacity, I have the privilege of working with many startups throughout the year, and it's one of the best parts about my job. And now we have the Okta Ventures platform where we get to work and engage more deeply with a variety of different startups. So today we have three that I'm particularly excited about. The three we have today are DataGrail, Productiv, and Ockam, and you'll hear from all of us for the next 40 minutes, talking about all things interesting to the modern CIO and things that are interesting towards identity while we're all here today. So before we get into it, let me give you a quick background on Okta Ventures. So as you heard in Freddie's keynote, we launched Okta Ventures a year ago at Octane. Last Octane, this happened. It's a $50 million vehicle. And the motivation here was one that evolved over time. It's something that we responded to what we're hearing from a lot of different companies out there. There was a period of time where we're meeting with a number of startups, and we realized there's some really interesting innovation happening. We thought that identity could play a foundational role to it, and these were things that were above and beyond where Okta is today, but we thought would be very interesting for our customers and our partners to start understanding a little bit better. So it really started off with like, what is the right stage appropriate manner to engage with startups? And here's where we started to focus on small fund, but more importantly, it's not just about the capital we put to work, but the different engagement that we have with the companies over time. And so we've done this over the course of a year. We've met with hundreds of companies as part of this, and we'd like to give you guys a glimpse of how that looks today. So with that, I would love to bring the panelists into the video session. Matthew, Jody, Daniel, how you doing?
Thanks for having us.
Great.
So why don't I just started with a quick background of what Okta Ventures is and kind of why we're doing it. I think it'd be a good opportunity for you to tell your story. Why don't we start off? We'll go around each of you. So we'll start off with you, Daniel, and then we can go to Matthew, then Jody. Tell us your story about your company, the founder story behind it, and what you do, and we'll start from there. Daniel?
Cool. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Monty. Thank you for having us, obviously. Excited for the digital format this year. And yeah, I mean, we're thrilled to be part of the Okta Ventures portfolio, I think. For us at DataGrail, myself, I have a background in sort of data products and applications, and my two co-founders are fairly similar. We each kind of spanned a few different areas. Myself more on the go-to-market side, so leading sales, marketing, and customer success teams. And then Earl, who leads product, really a data scientist, software engineer for fun. And then Ignacio, who leads the engineering team, he has a background in sort of machine learning and, sort of leading engineering teams. And so each of us sort of were looking at some of the problems that we wanted to solve with sort of 10 years in our discipline each. And, what was becoming very clear was this sort of the age of privacy, or arriving in this age of privacy, is an era that has come to fruition based on sort of just really a two-dimensional axis of complexity. One from legal complexity, so increasing regulation obviously started with the EU Privacy Directive before 2000, but more commonly known with GDPR and now with California's Consumer Privacy Act. And then at the same time, this increasing technical complexity that comes with, businesses using more and more applications and systems. And with those systems, personal data is now spread across an organization. So for, today's panel, thinking about the modern CIO, this creates some unique challenges because you're dealing with this regulatory risk while also dealing with your internal sort of teams that use personal data and perhaps need to keep that personal data to maintain business. But the consumer has different expectations around transparency and control that become quite challenging for businesses. And so for us, we started the business sort of midway through 2018. At that time, solely focused on just the EU's data protection regulation, so the GDPR. And in that area, what we saw as sort of the fundamental challenge was that, businesses, upon request, it's quite difficult for them to be able to retrieve the information across their organization, especially in some form of automated fashion. And then as the business evolved, it became clear that at a certain point, organizations just lose track of the information they have across the organization. And so we look to do data discovery and sort of automated data discovery, which leads to where we started to interact with Okta and Okta Ventures. For anyone today that's particularly interested in that experience, as well as how potential Okta customers could leverage DataGrail, we have created a unique page for today's presentation. So it's at datagrail.io/Okta. So if you check that out, that's just for folks for Octane. So please take a minute, either write that down, visit the website, and take a look there. But I think, what we realized was that Okta, as sort of a leader in the category, it was very clear that there was alignment on some of our key initiatives, specifically around this sort of identity management and tying the different identities of consumers, which ultimately businesses are trying to do with the challenges that I just described. So if we fast forward to some of now the clearer challenges as the consumer regulation passed January 1st, people trying to address California's regulation, it's very clear that the consumer is looking for, again, transparency and control. And we recently did a study that kind of emphasized that point, where we worked with 2,000 consumers, and we found that 62% of them, when they unsubscribe to an email, they keep getting more email. And so this is really tied to the consent and preferences problem, which again is really all related to identities. And so excited to kind of spend some time together with this group today, discussing how collectively the modern CIO and the modern CISO really needs a platform that is connected and integrated across the business. And that starts with obviously a position with Okta, and then connecting with DataGrail also.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. It's been fascinating to watch Daniel and the team grow, and I think you put it well with there's a company born in the age of privacy and kind of the unique demands that come from it. So Matthew, I'd love to hear your story.
Yeah, so our origin story is one that probably goes back almost pretty much my entire professional career. I started off building instrumentation systems for America's Cup boats. So a lot of sensors, data logging, mixing of weather data. And I did that for about a decade, ended up in Silicon Valley, and kind of pivoted from building systems to building tools for people that build systems. So built a weather API at Weather Underground. So if you've seen weather on your phone, chances are it uses that tool. I was at Heroku for a little while. And then most recently, I was at Microsoft, helping the team over there pivot to the open source friendly platform that they now are. While I was at Microsoft, again, I was working on developer tools and the entire pipeline, things like GitHub, container services with Docker, Mesosphere, Jenkins, Foundation, etc. I started to think about how compute is being distributed and decisions are being made outside of the data center. And I started realizing that there's this really difficult interoperability problem between all of this distributed compute as we're internet connecting vehicles and sensors, routing information in complicated sort of ways. And I realized this is a really difficult problem for developers to solve. So started thinking about how we could make interoperability between all the machines that we have in the world that are connected to the computer easy for developers. And while I started off with that problem, I quickly realized that interoperability actually has a root problem, which is all around trust. It's very difficult for machines and containers, whether you're running container services at the edge or you're running software in some real-time operating system and a smaller embedded device. It's really hard to know whether you should trust the information that you're receiving as a device that's outside the safety of a data center. And particularly if you think of all the cloud native developers, the millions of them building code for the past 10 years, they're not used to that environment. They've actually, there's a whole new class of cloud native developers that are used to using open source based developer tools. So started thinking about the trust problem and ultimately realized that had a whole other problem below it, which is all rooted in identity. So what we are building is simple developer user interfaces that abstract away the complexity of adding cryptographic identifiers that live in silicon in devices in the field. Fortunately, there's a lot of work being done there with semiconductor manufacturers. So there's a great way to create self-sovereign identities with cryptographic keys that are originated in and never leave hardware. Then we connect to the cloud from there. So set up authenticated communication, and that could happen either over an IP stack or any of the other wireless platforms out there, maybe Bluetooth or LoRaWAN. And then we do trusted messaging between the cloud and the edge device. So that means that messages are signed cryptographically signed using the key that is embedded in the device. And those messages are encrypted end-to-end specifically for the target. So we're making it easy for developers to connect edge to cloud using secure communication and simple developer tools that they're used to using. And obviously that aligns very well with Okta's mission around trust, identity, and building ecosystems. And I'm sure we're going to talk about it later, but I'm a strong believer in that the problems that CIOs and CSOs need to face is thinking about things in stacks going forward and not just singular monolithic solutions. So hence
that's great.
Partnership.
No, it's been fascinating just to watch how you're on some of the cutting edge of some of these early developments out there. Jody, love to hear your story about Productiv, and you launched 1 year ago. It came out at Octane, so we're excited to have you back over here.
We did, and we're sorry we can't all be together for Octane this year, but indeed we launched 1 year ago. So tell you a little bit about what Productiv does, and then I'll explain a little bit about how we got to where we are. So Productiv is really about being able to drive better business decisions by the CIO, by the VP of IT, in terms of executive level strategy around, we have all these SaaS applications in use in the organization, many of them connected to Okta, many more entering the organization on a regular basis, and really being able to understand at its core application engagement analytics. So answering this question of not just what software do we have in the organization and not just people are logging into the applications, but what's happening after they log in. And so really getting down to understanding feature level utilization within all these various tools to really play against the larger agenda at play, which is collaboration, productivity. How are we bringing all these tools into the organization? How are people using them? And ultimately, the rationale is around we're trying to achieve business goals. So how do we understand the role that these applications play? How do we understand who's using them, how they're using them, how they're being used together? Ultimately comes back around to driving business outcomes from the exec level all the way down through every application in use. So the company itself, we are about 2 years old. So we raised Series A from Excel about 2 years ago. We launched the company out of stealth a year ago at Octane 2019. It was a phenomenal event for us. We wound up raising our Series B about 6 months ago. Norwest Ventures led that, Excel participating, and that was the point that we were excited to work with Okta Ventures. A lot of conversations since about a year ago, sort of culminating in that larger partnership with the companies together. So we're excited to be part of the the Okta Ventures portfolio. We're excited about just the relationship we have with Okta. I'll talk a little bit about the founders and coming together. So my background, I'm CEO. My background is technical. Done engineering as well as product management and general management. Was most recently at Google. I was there for about 9 years. Used to lead Google Analytics and led the creation and building of the Google Analytics enterprise business. I have two co-founders. My CTO co-founder, longtime Microsoft, eBay, Amazon, and my other co-founder is COO, and all three of us coming actually from engineering backgrounds. His case, primarily in sales organizations, consulting, Bain, and a variety of places, most recently at LinkedIn. And so similar to some of the other portfolio companies, all three of us come into the table with a lot of experience and just a lot of understanding of what it means to build enterprise software and what it means to deliver enterprise value that we're selling into. These are, companies that are adopting SaaS are going heavier and heavier on cloud. Their portfolios are getting larger and larger. It's just a very, very natural tie-in of all the ways that common customers are working together and expecting their vendors to be working well together too.
So I think that's a great segue to just a broader context, which this audience will be interested in, which is the role of the modern CIO. And as you think about the modern CIO, there's an analogy of like what that's changed dramatically over the past 10 years. And if you think about through Okta's existence, so we're an 11-year-old company, and we've been partnering with these early stage, early CIOs and who've become increasingly influential as they've grown up. So with that, we'd love just to hear get each of your perspectives on the role of a modern CIO. And just one data point I'll call out is when you think about Okta's most recent Businesses at Work report, there's a statistic in there that roughly 10% of Okta's customers have more than 200 apps in the organization. So complexity is out there, and the CIOs need to figure out the best way to embrace this. So Jody, let's just build upon what you were talking about here. With this explosion in complexity, how are the CIOs thinking about utilizing your products?
Yeah, so the first element is exactly the kind of stat that Monty, you were just talking about there. The state of the industry that all of us are seeing is the world has gone SaaS, right? Nobody is moving away from a SaaS footprint and a cloud rollout, and so oftentimes there's first just trying to wrap arms around all the software that's out there. And historically, people have tried to do some of this basic management just with a spreadsheet. Maybe even some of our own organizations, we've seen this question of like, what applications do we have? What are we paying for? Who bought it? Who's using it? When does it renew? Has it been gone through legal review, security review? Is it being Okta managed? All these kinds of things. But the footprints, for sure, hundreds of applications, in some cases even thousands of applications. And the really interesting thing is that people are not reacting to that as it's a bad thing. They're viewing it as a fascinating opportunity in terms of this is actually a good thing. The behavior has changed in terms of how do we think about the portfolio of applications, and embracing what historically might have been considered shadow IT, saying there's a sprawl of SaaS applications. That's okay. That's actually a good thing, but I still need to be able to manage it all.
That's right. And Matthew, you alluded to it earlier. You were talking about how CIOs are thinking about creating a tech stack rather than a single vendor solution. Can you elaborate on that point?
Yeah. So whether people talk about it in the enterprise sense with digital transformation or just building applications, software is eating the world, all of these themes have been around for a very long time. Organizations are building their software stack for their specific business case, and you end up getting these best in breed layers of a stack, and it's important for there to be not only an architecture for thinking about things in stack, but also having this ability for developers inside the organization to, whether it's called shadow IT or just a developer enablement. You have buyers of technology throughout an organization, and to think of things as building an application for your specific business is, I think, as opposed to just going and buying something off the shelf. You don't go to Microsoft and say, "Hi, give me a digital transformation," and it's one line item on a invoice. You're buying all sorts of pieces of technology, and many of them are delivered as hosted SaaS products, but you're still assembling this and amalgamating this solution for your exact use case.
Yeah, and I think there's a common thread here, right? We talked about the role of the modern CIO adopting technologies, the decisions they have to make around the tech stack, and then when you think about the business processes you have to layer on top of it. And Daniel, and you're living through this right now with data privacy. Talk about the stakeholder landscape that you have to navigate within the organization, where privacy formerly was just like the legal department's purview, but now we're looking at CIOs, CISOs, and everyone else effectively touches it. So what are you seeing on that front?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of 2 points to touch on here. So one is, if you looked at the modern work report that Okta produced, you saw that the average organization's using 88 applications. That's up from 72, which is 21% increase in only just a few years. Then if you look at Gartner's sort of guidance, they're suggesting that by 2023, 65% of the world's population will have data protection. That's up from 10% right now. So that's a massive increase. And what that means is that privacy sort of come to the forefront in that, if you're in a CIO role or if you're in security, privacy is probably coming into your purview like it hasn't before. And so if you think about privacy, it's now permeating through anyone that is owning an application. So if you're an application owner, if you're in marketing, if you're in e-commerce, if you're in operations, you're probably interacting with personal data. And so as a result, the applications you're involved in or work with need to be connected to some workflow, either in a manual process or ideally in some form of automation that can do certain requirements for whether it be California's regulation that you may need a opt-out, right? So California has an example where, a consumer can ask a business to not sell their information. Now, for folks that have a loyalty program, that's quite challenging because that information may have been shared with many other third parties. And now folks in California can make those requests. So, I think privacy has definitely moved, to your point, from sort of being a legal construct that, perhaps is just the policy on the website to, throughout the organization, business decisions are now, it's involved in business decisions from the beginning, right? And throughout sort of a process change, similar to what we've discussed thus far.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting point across the points that both of you guys are making, which is I think that if we go back, 10 years, the IT portfolio at all these applications was actually heavily curated, right? Because it was being centrally procured. It was being very carefully thought through from a legal standpoint, a privacy standpoint, for all the sort of aspects of things. And then with the fact that the buying process has changed these days, right? Every business unit is buying things. People are expensing things. The curation process has changed and escaped, but it's still relevant. And it's important not just in the context of individual applications, but actually the set of applications, right? The construct of, how do we collaborate? If I'm an engineer in the course of a given day, I'm using Slack, I'm using GitHub, I'm using Zoom, I'm using, Google Docs, all these various things. And so the portfolio spread is not just a management question, but it's actually a really interesting question to still be solved to say, do we have the right set of applications that work really well together for us while still being compliant with all the important regulatory things?
No, I think it's a spot on. We see this with some of our, innovative CIOs who are thinking broadly about this. It's not just about providing a compliance, but also being an enabler to the business process within the organization, and doing that in an environment where there's immense complexity out there. So that's a great point. So let's quickly talk a little bit about, just to build on that thread, like what are there dangers in a world with enhanced digital identities? If you think about that, as you get richer data around it, trust becomes a bigger issue. And if you're a startup developing an application, the surface area and the principles you have to think about are now broader than you had to before. How are you seeing startups deal with that? Daniel, I'll let you given the privacy part.
I can I can take a pass on that one. So I mean, I think the first thing that you need to decide is the regulatory environment in which your business intends to operate, and where do you intend to have customers, right? So if you're a founder, or if you're an early stage company and you're thinking about, okay, where, what type of regulation will my business need to adhere to? So if your intention is to do business in Europe, yeah, you're going to need to comply with Europe's, GDPR. If your intention is to keep, local or sort of national customers, i.e. in the United States, then you would need to look at the regulations for the US. And so those may include California's regulation, those may include Nevada's regulation, and so on and so forth. But that's sort of the starting point. The second point is to think about, what type of business applications will your organization need? So what is that ideal stack? And what type of personal data would those organizations consume, use, transfer? And so that's really sort of a data discovery, inventory, or mapping exercise. And that's sort of like the minimum viable product, if you will, for a privacy program, where you at least know what you have, and you know what your business is consuming and using. So that's sort of like the first two steps. Everything after that is business process to look at how you maintain a sort of optimal customer experience, because it's not always just about compliance. There's obviously, can you actually create an optimal consumer experience for this part of your offering, right? So there are businesses that are looking at privacy as a competitive advantage. And so I think, if you're a founder starting out now, I would take that lens to the problem, because if you look at companies like Dyson, for example, they have a privacy commitment by their CEO that's on their privacy page. That's very different to, trying to hide the privacy form somewhere down your privacy policy.
Yeah. So let's stay on this thread of trust. And everything we've been discussing here has been around, recently around, employees, to the cloud apps and the app, and how the cloud applications are there's more of those happening within the enterprise. Let's talk about devices for a second, the different resource types out there, and some of the requirements that are happening. Because a lot of these, you could argue the n number of complex things that can happen down the device level is just a whole different spectrum. So Matthew, I'd love to get your perspective on where you see this notion of trust and identities, and with a couple things that are going to happen down there down at the device level. Yeah.
So let's also to even expand. I think of identity as an even more expanded set than human identity, which I realize that most of what Okta works on is in enterprise and human-based identity, but really anything that you can attribute some sort of attestation to, like this room, the computer I'm talking to, us individually, our roles in the companies that we work for. These are all add to our identity. And what these different attestations then can have different identifiers. And machines are a great place to store those identifiers, particularly with a lot of the biomechanics and other ways that people can log into their machines to validate that they are who they say they are, or that machine is what it is. I feel like there was a second part to your question.
No, it's talking about the complexity. I think you're covering with some of the attestation and this technology stack is still, technology stack that's relevant for devices is still evolving, right?
Yeah, I think to go back to your previous question, I'll kind of join the two together. I think that there's I truly believe that identity is the root problem, that we've just scratched the surface on it. And you just look at the number of security issues across the industry, and you start chipping away at what really happened. Very many times you end up down at the identity layer. So it is super foundational. But if you think about, a little bit further into the future, not just, the next several quarters, but many years from now, as you have a good base of identifiers and identities for people's, places, things, this gets a little bit technical, but there are some cryptographic ways of doing what are essentially verifiable claims. So you can, like, for example, if we're talking about owning, like, individuals owning data, you could have a key that is stored in your phone. That data could always belong to you, and then you could give someone access to it so that you're never, like, we're in a situation now where we're giving away data all the time, and that's landing somewhere else. But it's very possible, actually, with through some really cool cryptography, to be able to tie that data to a key, and then you are giving access to it on a one-off basis with different permissions. So that's where this ecosystem of identity starts really coming together, because there are about 20 different problems that have to be solved in that little kind of soundbite I just gave. And it's going to involve people coming at it from a lot of different directions. So there are all sorts of companies that can be started over the next 5 to 10 years, really focusing on different aspects of identity and different abstractions in the stack, from very technical to the user experiences that get stacked on top of that, industry specific. It's a very greenfield area.
So let's switch gears for a minute and talk about, for each of these spaces, there's other companies, other incumbents in the space. So let's talk about partnerships for a second, and the role partnerships play in your respective ecosystems, and how you think about, as a startup, if you were to give advice to another startup, how would you approach partnering with a larger company? So Jody, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think, to me, partnerships is the business equivalent of the API economy, right? We have all these amazing tools today, how they work well together, the expectations of a CIO in terms of, again, I don't think about a single application. I think about multiple applications. I think the same sort of thought process carries through as a startup. And I would argue even at Okta size, right? You're playing in a larger ecosystem, and you've got to be aware of what the world looks like from your customer's perspective, which is, I do work with all these various vendors, and I want them to work well with each other, right? Don't make me do all the system integration. I'd like you guys to go figure it out. And so for us, a lot of energies on the partnership side, the business relationship, the go-to-market relationship, the data relationship kind of things, because there truly is an opportunity here to do the 1 and 1 is 3 for our shared customers. And frankly, they're expecting that. And so the onus is on us to partner within the ecosystem to make it easier for our customers. Great.
Daniel, your side, we've been partnering in the field together. This is something that's happened over the past few months. Talk about how, if you're to give advice to another startup, and you're working with somebody who's a bit larger, what works well in that relationship, and how do you see that? Where we fit. You've done a good job figuring out kind of the right touch points. So, what advice would you give to another startup?
Yeah, I mean, I think shared customers talks, right? So if you really want to think about demonstrating value to a larger organization who's considering a partnership, you'll remember the first conversations we had a handful of shared customers already using the platform. And so I think, for anyone that's looking to do partnerships, I think that the fastest path is, I think Jody kind of alluded to it. You're going to need to invest in the integration work yourself as the smaller organization to make that work. And most large organizations at this point have open API capability. And so looking at the documentation, working out, what that actually looks like, can it be connected? Can we build something without involving the larger organization? And in the case of Okta, we did. And I think, that has proven to be very successful for us. And I think the shared success that our shared customers get from using both platforms is a really good story, both internally, but but also externally as we take it to market to potential customers. And so I think, creating collateral once you have that also speeds up that process. And continually focusing on the number one thing that will always be needed, which is why we're all doing this, is marketing, right? So, I think deals will obviously progress, but everything starts with marketing. And so once you're able to create shared value, taking that to market either with videos or collateral or webinars, all of these things help push the conversation forward.
And let me just add another topic here, which is a little bit more, each of you can think about your respective companies as we've evolved the conversation. So in today's environment, COVID-19, so for all the startup founders and corporate partners watching this webcast right now, talk about how you probably approached that problem over the past few weeks, and how do startups in general need to adjust to today's environment? We can start off. I'll start off with Matthew.
That's a little bit of a trick question for us because we were designed from the ground up to be a remote first company. So there are a couple different companies that are much larger than us that have done a really good job of this over the past several years. GitLab and HashiCorp are two that come to mind. So our entire team is distributed. This is my normal day, talking to people in remote locations, and it also, I must admit, our technology lends itself to that sort of distributed workforce because we are open source software. As people that have come together to start this company to build open source software, it's all about building an ecosystem and community, and that community is just increasingly becoming more and more spread around the world. So it actually is. It's good on a couple of fronts. One, for the broad open source community, it's great for the partnerships that we were just talking about. Makes it very technically have a low bar to partner with bigger companies. In fact, they don't even need to talk to us. They could just start contributing to the code base if they wanted. And then from a hiring standpoint, it allows us to search the world for the very, very best people. We're really committed to building a super high performance, very senior team, and we feel like we can go out. We're not using the primary key of geography. We're using the primary key of talent and what they can bring to the team. So it's I think that with some of our partners, there are a couple of adjustments, but it's kind of for us, it's been basically business as normal for the past 2 weeks.
Right. So let's, all good panels typically ask kind of the predictions question. So I'm gonna give you each a chance to answer this one. But no time has been more uncertain than where we are now. So this is probably more difficult than normal to answer. So what do you predict for the next year in terms of business activity or maybe in your respective space? Just love to hear from you guys. So Jody, let's start with you.
Yeah, let's do it. Look, I think that we are in a fascinating time in the in the industry, and certainly macroeconomically and with COVID, et cetera. But to me, this is actually an acceleration of a trend that we were already on, which gets to the core of like, how do we work? And we have all these applications. We talk about productivity. We talk about the ability to remotely collaborate. We're in the biggest stress test from a technology standpoint ever. And there's a very, very clear set of changes that we're already seeing taking place. And I expect are going to continue to accelerate, which again goes back to these questions of, I've got to be smarter about all the applications we've got. I've got to really be able to think about the business value being delivered. And I've got to be able to answer these productivity kinds of questions. I can tell you it's a trend that we've been seeing happening. And again, even just the past 2 weeks, I see it from my standpoint, looking across a large number of customers, the increased amount of engagement, with all these various applications, right? Zoom usage has skyrocketed, Box has gone up, Slack, Teams, trend-wise, everybody's going up. The interesting thing is, so where do we continue from there? As we think about the application portfolio, what are the things that people are doubling down on? And people are unfortunately also finding out right now things that they put in place that are not working, and they've got to really rev thinking on that. But the larger story is one of a drive towards productivity.
Yeah. Daniel, your side?
Yeah, I think some interesting comments there. I think the changes, these are unlike changes we've seen before, right? So I think it's very easy to look at a 2008, 2009 period and sort of baseline this, change in economic and socioeconomic environment based on that sort of 2008, 2009 timeline or a previous recession timeline. I think Jody's right. There are some changes at the enterprise that we're going to see. I think for small businesses and for mid-market businesses, this is going to be challenging. For existing local businesses, this is going to be really challenging, right? There are many companies, restaurants, these types of sizes that are really going to struggle. I think they're going to need to adopt technology more than they have. So whether that's using delivery services to continue operating service, or finding other, revenue sort of channels. But this next year is going to be an interesting time, and I think we'd be foolish to not look at those trends. But I do think the enterprise will continue to Jody's point, refine how they use applications, refine how they go to market, whether it's a consumer brand or a B2B organization. And I think part of that stems with putting, sort of the customer experience at the front, which includes, of course, some of the things that I've discussed around privacy. But I do think we'd be foolish to think that business is going to operate as it has for the last decade in the changes that we're seeing even in the next few months. And so I think it is going to be a forcing function for some businesses to really do an organizational sort of look or 360 to assess, where can they bring in additional forms of revenue, or how can they use the systems that they've purchased today in different ways to, continue to operate.
Great. Matthew, I'll let you close this out here.
Yeah. I'll specifically state of the swim lane that I at least know a little bit about, not make more societal things. I think the services industries are, and I really feel for them. Definitely go out and buy gift cards to your favorite restaurants and keep supporting them during this period of time. But a topic that I know a little bit more about on the software side, I still feel like it's early innings. Pretty much, there's just so many greenfield opportunities in the software world. I like in my direct space, IoT security is a complete debacle from like people are basically saying clear text messages in industrial systems, all of those nation state actor threats, and, moving business processes to, the edge and IoT is, some of the stories we hear, there's basically we're at a level of near negligence. I think privacy is in the earliest moments. Who owns data and that concept of where data lands and how you can control your own data and privacy is I think still there's so much work that's to be done there. And in the identity space, I think that is a piece that ties all of this together, and all of those fundamental primitive pieces still need to be put in place. So from the kind of the perspective of people that are at this conference and listening to this talk, I just think there's so much software that needs to be built, and there's so much room to run for the big cloud providers, the Microsofts and the AWSs and the Googles, some of the newer public companies like Okta, and startups like ours, and then even some that haven't even existed yet. And the last couple downturns have produced some amazing companies. I'm sure that this will do the same.
Well, thank you, everybody. I think we covered a lot of ground today on a variety of topics, from the modern CIO to kind of what's coming next in our industries. So Thanks to everybody who tuned in. Please enjoy the rest of your Octane Live, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Bye.